Welcome into Sportsmemo's betting podcast. We're breaking down the Big Ten Conference football preview with Rob Veno. Rob, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am great today, Drew. Happy Friday to you. This is another summer weekend where we get a little bit closer to college football, which is the subject matter of our podcast today.
Absolutely. Inching closer to college football season. Know a lot of the listeners out there excited about it. Thanks for listening to reaching out to both Robbie and myself on stuff everybody's interested in. I had a couple guys reach out about the Big 12 conference, and we'll do that one next. We're doing Big 10 now. We'll do actually the East Division today and the West Division early next week with Robbie. And then Big 12 will be next up on the board. You can reach out to Robbie Veno on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports, myself, Drew Martin, at Drew Martin Bets. But Robbie, let's get right into this. East Division will go in alphabetical order. We got the Indiana Hoosiers up first. 5-7 last year, left out of the bowl game, just 2-7 in conference. Against the spread, went 5-7 as well. So it looks like the odds makers had them pegged just about right, just at 5-7, and 7-5 towards the over, trended small towards the over here. Robbie, what are you thinking for the Indiana Hoosiers this upcoming year in the Big Ten?
Yeah, well, it's the first of three teams, and ironically, Drew, it'll be the first three teams we talk about since we're going in alphabetical order that have new offensive coordinators. So for the Hoosiers, which I don't know that, 6 months out from the end of the regular season college football, I don't know that many people would remember that Indiana inside the conference last year gained 408 yards per game. Offensively, they had been known as a real steady offense for a few years. Tom Allen came in, the defense took over a couple years back, and the offense slacked, but the offense came back last year, and now they've added Fresno State offensive coordinator Kalen DeBoer. Now, for those who watch a lot of Mountain West football last year, and Kalen DeBoer's Fresno State offense led by Marcus McMaryion, you'll remember he had a tremendous touchdown to interception rate. I'm off the top of my head, Drew, I'm remembering like 25 touchdowns to 3 interceptions regular season before that snow game in the championship against Boise State. But His offense is known for being diverse. They can run, they can throw, and that's what DeBoer's aiming for here. He's not totally overhauling the system, but this system is going to be far more balanced and a little bit more up-tempo according to what we saw through the spring, into the spring game, and what we're reading heading into the summer. So you can look for a fast-paced Indiana offense, which will just use run or pass, basically, Drew, dependent upon opponent. DeBoer is very flexible. All the comments I read coming from him describing his offense, if we can beat you with the pass, we're going to throw 40 times. If you're going to lay back and only rush 6, then we're going to run the ball. So either way, it looks like Indiana's got really good skill position people to make this work. And I will just start by saying that the wide receiving duo, a senior duo of Donovan Hale and Nick Westbrook, who, by the way, when we're looking at mismatches or matchups in the season for individual games, just remember this one. Hale and Westbrook, the two outside receivers for Indiana, are 6'4" and 6'3", big guys with speed. So Indiana's going to have that type of personnel at the wide receiver position. They are look to be pretty good, pretty well set at running back. The running game looked really good in the spring game. So I think that the offense, Drew, may even take a tick up. And remember, they averaged 408 yards per game last year while being in the division with Michigan State's defense, Michigan's defense, Penn State's defense, Ohio State's defense, all teams that are considered by many to be maybe the 4 best teams in the Big Ten overall, divisions aside. So pretty good numbers posted by Indiana. What will happen, or what will depend, what will make their season what it is, will probably be the defense. I think they're going to be fine offensively, but defensively they bring in Kane Womack to be the new play caller. Tom Allen had called plays for this defense ever since he got there, but he gave up the play calling reins. They're not going to change anything schematically, you're just going to have a different play caller here. So defense remains the same. They need to get better because last year that defense fell apart on Tom Allen. 457 yards allowed per game inside the Big Ten. Again, as we go on year by year, offenses become more explosive, but still, that was not really a Tom Allen defense, not one that we had become accustomed to seeing. So I think they get it back a little bit on defense. I have a little check mark next to this team because I think they'll be undervalued. Indiana's not a team necessarily that people rush to bet. They don't draw a ton of money, especially in the conference and especially the division that they're in. They're buried, maybe, fifth or sixth with Maryland. So I think that you might get a little bit of value with these guys. Last year, you quoted the point spread numbers. Totals wise, we'll see if they're a little more explosive and they're only a little better defensively. Then, over might be a way to go with this team. This Big Ten East, which really used to be a group of teams that were, I don't want to call them Woody Hayes style, 3 yards, cloud of dust, but they were certainly more traditional offenses. They've really changed over the course of the last few years now, and we see with the Michigan team, which we'll talk about in a minute, that things are a little more wide open in the Big Ten. So perhaps if the odds makers are a little slow on the totals trigger here, we can capitalize on Indiana games over the total. Their cross-division games, when they go to play West teams this year, will be Nebraska, Northwestern, and Purdue. Indiana, of course, as you and I were talking about off air, they have that traditional rivalry with Purdue. But those three teams are difficult as well. So straight-up wins are going to be tough to come by. They missed the bowl by one game last year. I don't have in front of me what their season over-under win total is right now. But, for them to get to 6 wins and a bowl game in the division that they're in and with those crossover games could be a little difficult.
Yeah, I mean, looking at their schedule, Robbie, and it's tough for programs like Indiana because they are on the east side, and when you're talking the East and the Big Ten, it's, full of the blue bloods. They got Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State. It's kind of tough sledding here for the Indianas and the Rutgers of the world. And when you look at their record last year, just 5-7, one game out of a bowl game, and you go down their schedule this year trying to get to that key number of 6 wins, the extra bowl practices, the bowl game, get your kind of program on the rise here. Going at the top of their schedule here, they start off with Ball State, Eastern Illinois, Ohio State, and then UConn. It's conceivable to see them 3-1 out the gate, heading to East Lansing to take on Michigan State, and they're going to need to be 3-1 going into that game because then they'll have Rutgers. It's possible to see them sitting at 4-2 down the latter half of their schedule. They got to find 2 more wins here. You bring up the at Purdue game, that could be a key one at the end of the season, November 30th. To get to that 6th win. It's trying to find these 6 wins, get them into a bowl game. And Robbie, maybe finish it off here. Any last thoughts? And also, what is the Purdue-Indiana rivalry? What are they playing for again? It's a good one, right?
Yeah, they call that the old Oaken Bucket.
That's it, Oaken Bucket.
And that's been around forever. I think that's one of those like 1800s type rivalries between these two teams. And last year, Drew, you hit it on the head. That game was the deciding game for Indiana's bowl chances, and they lost that game to Purdue. It's conceivable, as you went down the schedule, if you go down one more week, it's conceivable that they could go on the road and beat Maryland and be 5-2 on October 19th, needing just 1 win. But they're likely to be underdog in their last 5 games. I mean, I can't see them being a favorite at Nebraska. They may not be favored at home against Northwestern, who has really developed. Pat Fitzgerald has got a program on the rise there. They're not going to be favored at Penn State. They won't be favored home against Michigan, and they won't be favored at Purdue. So you got 5 games to win one, possibly if everything goes well and they go 5-2. Boy, to close the season on 5 straight up losses and not make a bowl would be disheartening for this team. However, you and I deal in point spreads, and I think that this team really could be one of those point spread value type teams. And I'm also looking toward totals with Indiana, maybe playing them over if we see them, priced in that general Big Ten range, which is not necessarily Pac-12, Big 12, those types of ranges. If you just look at last year, Indiana showed totals over 60 only 3 times in 12 games. So it's possible you can make money with this team over the total.
All right, Robbie. We'll move on to Maryland next. And, guys, we do have a coupon code here for the podcast, $300 off. Any full season football package for Robbie Veno or myself, Drew Martin, $300 off using the coupon code CFBPOD. That's as in podcast. That's CFBPOD at checkout for $300 off any full season football package at sportsmemo.com. Robbie, let's move down the line here. In the Big Ten East preview, we got the Maryland Terrapins, 5-7 last year, left out of a bowl game as well, just 3-6 in conference, went 6-6 ATS against the number, pretty much 50-50 here, 6-6, and also 6-6 over under. So the odds makers had Maryland pegged right as in terms of full season, how they finished over under and both against the spread. But what are you thinking about betting Maryland this year?
Yeah, and here we have a complete overhaul as far as head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and systems are concerned. So it's going to be a case of how well does Maryland adapt to the new styles here. Mike Locksley comes in as the new head coach, and he took control of both schemes implemented offensively and defensively, Drew. He hired coordinators, Scotty Montgomery, who was the East Carolina head coach the past 3 seasons. He's your offensive coordinator, QB's coach. And Joker Phillips, who has been an offensive assistant for quite a while, comes over, leaves Cincinnati, which was, a little bit of a heartbreak for the Cincinnati Bearcats to lose Joker Phillips. Luke Fickell, a little disappointed that he loses him as his wide receivers coach. But we remember Joker Phillips from Kentucky a few years before that. And, of course, he worked with Ohio State in 2016. So you got 2 really good offensive minds, but they're going to run the system that Mike Locksley has told them to implement. And what that is the Alabama system from last year. Locksley was the offensive coordinator at Bama last year, so obviously they don't have the same personnel as does Alabama, but you can remember the differences. Alabama became a spread, more vertical attack type team with Tua at quarterback. They went downfield much, much more. They maintained their running game. So this is going to be an offense based on a lot of RPO concepts. Scotty Montgomery really doesn't have an awful lot, from what I read, of his playbook from East Carolina implemented here. It's really, like I say, Mike Locksley bringing Alabama's offensive playbook over. They're going to use the tight end a lot, which has not been a staple of the Maryland offense whatsoever, so that's going to be different. Remember last year that Maryland had all the trouble to start the season with head coach DJ Durkin, who wound up not coaching a game, got fired on October 31st, but didn't coach a game. And your head coach here was Matt Canada, so we had Matt Canada's offense. Matt Canada had got run out of LSU the season before. So the difference is dramatic because Canada's more about different formations and a lot of motion and all that stuff, where Locksley's more about a power-type spread with a vertical approach. So we'll see how it goes for Maryland. The good news for them, at least they consider it to be good news. I may be of a different opinion here because I'm not terribly high on their quarterback situation, but they do bring in Josh Jackson, transfer from Virginia Tech. It looks like Josh Jackson will get the job. The returning starter here is Tyrell Pigram, who ran a different style offense and is really built for a different style offense here, much more of a runner than a passer. So you're dealing with a guy who's better in an offense based on quarterback runs, and that's not going to be the case here. So it looks like Jackson will take over. Jackson's a physical specimen. Anybody who's seen him knows that, but his accuracy at Virginia Tech, really, after a few games watching him, I really soured on him, and I don't know what he'll bring to Maryland here. I don't know that the offense is going to take off right out of the chute, Drew. Defensively, they're bringing in John Hoke to run their defense. Now, John Hoke is a guy who comes from the NFL. He worked for Tampa Bay the last 3 years. Going to scrap their 4-2-5 defense and implement a 4-3. It makes sense for these teams that can't recruit a ton of depth across the defensive line. If you can't rotate 7 really good college football defensive linemen, and you're better off playing a 3-4 with smaller guys and speed. That's what they'll do. They're going to have all kinds of different alignments, though. I mean, their 3-4, when you look at their spring game, Drew, is really in name only, because I think the first 10 plays that Maryland ran in their spring game, John Hoke called 6 different defensive fronts. So they're going to be extremely multiple, designed like most defenses nowadays for down and distance situation. They've got athletes. I don't want to sell this team short because they've done a pretty good job recruiting, and they've got athletes. And their running back, Anthony McFarland, who I think averaged over 8 yards a carry last year, is a tremendous running back. They'll lean on him a little bit. I just don't know if the team will get accustomed to both systems immediately. And when you're in that division, boy, it's tough. I mean, they get the pleasure of starting the season with Howard, which you'll get a win, but you won't be tested. But then they have to play Syracuse. They got to go to Temple. And then they get into divisional play. Their cross-division games are Purdue, Minnesota, and Nebraska, the same as Indiana's were. It's a hard schedule. I don't know if they can get to 6 wins and qualify for a bowl game. They may be a couple years away, but I think they may be going in the right direction here because Loxley's a great recruiter. And like I say, Maryland's not void of talent. They're just, a couple steps behind everybody else inside that division, at least the top 4.
Yeah, Robbie, good breakdown. And the quarterback situation that you bring up is very interesting. I think going to be a key aspect here in betting on or against Maryland. I mean, last year they had Kasim Hill in Pigram, like you said, and 2 athletic guys. And what I remember about Maryland is out the gates, they came out swinging. I mean, they took it to Texas. They looked really good. And then they dropped, I believe, 4 or 5 straight to end the season, left out of a bowl game. Mainly because of the quarterback injuries. Those guys got banged up. They were athletic. I thought they were really good. I'm just doing quick searches here. Kasim Hill, I think he's in the transfer portal. It looks like Pigman's back. But against Josh Jackson Jackson from Virginia Tech, like you started, I think you were kind of leaning towards souring on him. Man, if you're not accurate in college football and you don't have next level mobility, I don't look to bet on you, and I don't think that Jackson has that. And so I would be actually surprised if he won this starting job, Robbie. Are you reading that they already named him the starter, or are they going into camp and battling it out?
They're going to battle it out in the summer, but it looks, reading between the lines, like he is the best fit for that system. He's got the type of arm that can rifle it 60 yards down. If they want to play a little more vertical, Maryland was so much east-west football last year, and McFarland, who, like you say, they started off the year by defeating Texas for the second year in a row, and McFarland was a star right away. But as the season goes on and teams start loading the box with 8 guys to stop your running attack, you've got to be able to throw downfield, and that's where, the rotation and a lot of it due to injuries, like you say, between Pigram and Hill just didn't work because those guys couldn't consistently complete passes against the types of defenses that they're going to face inside the Big Ten. So I would guess it's going to be Jackson, and if you're I don't know if you're in the same boat as I am or not, but Jackson to me just overshoots a lot of receivers. Like I say, there was a guy at Virginia Tech a few years before that, before Jackson arrived, who had the same qualities: big, strong arm, capable of running, which Jackson is capable of running in this system. But horribly inaccurate. Logan Woodside, I think, now comes to my mind.
Logan Woodside was Toledo's
right. Logan somebody. I'll have to look it up. But there was a Virginia Tech quarterback, maybe 13, 14. Same thing, though, to get to my point. Same size, same physical attributes, same inconsistencies throwing the football. Guy went to the NFL and wound up not playing whatsoever. I think he wound up with Arizona. So, unless Jackson improves, Drew, let's face it, Mike Loxley comes from Alabama, where Tua was extremely accurate, maybe the most accurate quarterback in NCAA Division I football. And now you get Josh Jackson. You're not blessed with Jerry Jeudy and that wide receiving core. It's not to say that Maryland doesn't have talented kids, because they do, but I just don't know. First year, I think he's going to have to recruit a better quarterback for accuracy, and unless Jackson really proves me wrong, which he could. These guys get better year in, year out. If he proves me wrong, Maryland could be very, very difficult. A team that I've got a check mark next to Indiana. I think you'd put a question mark next to Maryland.
All right, Robbie. We'll move down the list here. Next four are the big boys in the division. We'll start off with Michigan here. The Wolverines finished 10-3 last year, 8-1 in conference, 6-7 ATS. Small losers, betting them every game. 8-5 towards the over, trended towards the over here. Robbie, what are you thinking in Ann Arbor this year?
Okay, so the first thing is Virginia Tech's quarterback was Logan Thomas.
Logan Thomas, that's it.
All right, so I had to go.
You had Logan,
to do a little search there. To these kids, we cover so many teams and so many different names. Sometimes you lose track, but that was my point for Michigan. Now here we go, Drew. Jim Harbaugh has come out of the cave, out of the Stone Age, and I watched Michigan's spring game, and it did not look like a Michigan offense under Jim Harbaugh. It didn't look like a Stanford offense under Jim Harbaugh. It didn't look like anything Jim Harbaugh's done in college football. But he's turned it over, and he's given the offensive reins to Josh Gaddis, who comes over once again from Alabama. Nick Saban just continues to lose assistants. Josh Gaddis was the co-offensive coordinator last year and wide receivers coach. Worked at Penn State before that and Vanderbilt before that. They're going to be as wide open can be. It's going to be a pro-style spread, which they're not. Obviously, Michigan's never going to abandon the running game. But boy, did they throw it, and boy, did they go with tempo in that spring game. So those are two things that you just don't see out of Michigan-style offense. They're so deliberate. They're so ground conscious. But now you have Shea Patterson, and they probably have the best trio of wide receivers in this conference because they're all healthy now. Donovan Peoples-Jones, who has battled injuries throughout his career, healthy. Nico Collins, healthy. Tariq Black, who's battled injuries the last 2 years, healthy. And boy, Gaddis was excited to the possibilities with Shea Patterson running an offense that's built more to his strengths and with the amount of skill position talent that they have. So expect Michigan to be a faster team. Expect them to be much more to evolve into the passing game much more. If you want a comparison here for Josh Gaddis and what the offense will look like, he describes his offense as a mutt of an offense because he's taken bits and pieces from everywhere he's been. But the base of this offense, remember, he was at Penn State. He learned under Joe Moorhead. So he has said that the base of his offense, the foundation of his offense, is taken from Joe Moorhead. Prior to Penn State, he was at Vanderbilt, so he had 2 stints under James Franklin, the head coach at Vanderbilt and Penn State, while he was an offensive assistant. Some of James Franklin's stuff is in here. He worked for Western Michigan under Bill Cubit. Remember, Western Michigan under Bill Cubit was a pretty good passing team and a little I would say they're similar. Bill Cubit was similar in his style to that of Joe Moorhead. So that, if you can think of that and think of Trace McSorley and that Penn State offense that Joe Moorhead was running, that's probably what you're going to see here with a little bit more tempo. So I'm very interested to see how Michigan executes. They haven't installed the entire playbook yet. The rest is coming in the fall. We know that defensively, Drew, last year this was the number one defense in all of college football until Ohio State laid 63 on them. And the biggest problem in that game was Ohio State perimeter speed, wide receiver speed against Michigan's defensive style, defensive system, which Jim Harbaugh just wouldn't come out of in that game, and they got run over. So there's going to be a couple of minor adjustments made on that end. Scheme stays the same, but the offense is the big story here for Michigan. They get off schedule-wise with Middle Tennessee and Army. Should be 2 easy wins for them. Army's a little bit down this season. Then they get right into it after a bye week. And lucky for Michigan, you get a bye week after those 2 games to prepare for Wisconsin. So 2 weeks to get ready for the Badgers, go into conference play. Their other 2 non-division games inside the Big Ten, aside from Wisconsin, are Iowa and Illinois. Iowa happens to be at home. Illinois is on the road, so Michigan could very well go 3-0 in their non-divisional battles. Ohio State, they get at home. Penn State, they have to go on the road to play. But Michigan State, they get at home. So to me, when I was doing a little schedule analysis here, their schedule is pretty favorable as far as getting the better teams on their home field and playing very few, if any, aside from Penn State, power teams on the road. Penn State and Wisconsin would be the two. So probably a pretty favorable schedule here for Michigan. I'm interested to see how this offense looks comes fall, but in watching that spring game, it really was different. Shea Patterson looked like he's having a ball in that offense.
Robbie, let's move down the line here. We got the Michigan State Spartans up next. 7-6 last year, down year there for Sparty. Finished 4-9 ATS, money burner. 4-9 also over-under, big under-trender as well. But what are you thinking here for the Michigan State Spartans?
You know, in the lead into this podcast, Drew, when we first started, I was wrong because I said the first three teams we would talk about all have offensive coordinator changes. They do, but Michigan State does as well. The difference here is Michigan State's was a promotion. Mark D'Antonio said this was the biggest coaching shakeup I've ever had in my entire tenure here at Michigan State. He's starting his 13th season. He's a guy who likes stability. Michigan State's coaching staff has been pretty stable, but their offense was so god-awful last year that something had to be done. He demoted his co-coordinators, gave them different assistant jobs, and promoted Brad Salem, who was their running backs coach last year and quarterbacks coach for the 6 years before that. He's been with the team for 10 years. This will be his 10th season. So it's a guy who's been around the offensive personnel the whole time for a decade. But now he becomes offensive coordinator. He has had some experience calling plays before. Actually did it on the Division II level at Augustana College. Augustana, for people old enough like I am to remember, Ken Anderson, the quarterback for the Bengals, went there years ago. But he just felt that they had to shake things up and they had to make changes to their offense. Again, like I just said about Jim Harbaugh, here comes Mark D'Antonio coming out of the Stone Age. Brian Lewerke and that offense were supposed to be real good last year. They weren't. We're going to see if the subtle changes they've made to this multiple offense. The key one here, Drew, again, being tempo. Like Michigan, we're not used to seeing Michigan State go up tempo, but they're going to run some tempo offense this year. They're trying to be less predictable. You know, let's not just run on first down every time, which for guys like me and you that sometimes hold tickets on teams like this, you get frustrated with their predictability. That probably ends here. He wants to see changes. He's given Salem pretty much free reign to do whatever he wants here as far as the play calling is concerned and whatever changes he wants to make. So again, they're not going to overhaul the entire system, but they're going to try and be less predictable, go quicker. The defense was good last year, way too good to have the season that they had. I would expect that they're a strong defense once again under Mike Tressel. But the big story once again for one of these Big Ten teams is the offensive change, the new coordinator, going quicker. As I said earlier, these teams are really evolving now. So if we continue to see these Big Ten totals, I think I said this about Indiana, that are placed in the 50s, you might be able to make a lot of money on Big Ten overs this year because these teams are going to the skies with the football, and they're going a lot quicker than they have in the past. This team opens with Tulsa and Western Michigan. Then they have Arizona State. But this time, you know, whenever I see this Michigan State-Arizona State game, I always think it's at night and in the desert, and Michigan State gets ambushed. But here they're at home, and then they get into conference play. The cross-divisional games are Northwestern, tough matchup on the road. Wisconsin, tough matchup on the road. And then Illinois at home. So Michigan State, I expect to improve a lot here, Drew. A lot of the same personnel, same quarterback. Let's see if they can move the football now and, you know, try and pick up 7 or 8 on first down and get back to the line of scrimmage and move the football in ways that modern offenses do.
Yeah, Robbie, good breakdown. I'm looking at the schedule here. Got to give props to Michigan, or, you know, I don't know about props, but their schedule is tough. And I'm talking about Michigan because they have Notre Dame in here, plus the Big Ten. schedule, so that they really only have 2 non-conference, games where you can kind of chalk up as wins here. Michigan State, like you said, Tulsa, Western Michigan, Arizona State. Yeah, they got that kind of rivalry going on with Arizona State there. 2 bye weeks as well. Looking at the some of the season win totals, which you brought up, are up at Bet Online, and seeing them here, Michigan at 9.5 wins. Big juice towards the over. A lot of people already taking the over. Also, Michigan State sitting at 7 wins right now. So those are 2 out. We'll also talk about Ohio State coming up, and theirs is set at 10 wins right now, minus 140 towards the over. Those are according to Bet Online right now. We got Ohio State up next. And guys, remember the coupon code. Listening to Robbie Veno right now. He's knowing his stuff, putting in his work in the off season. Sets up well for the beginning of college football season coming up. CFB Pod at checkout for any full football season for Robbie Veno or myself, Drew Martin, for $300 off. That coupon code is CFBPOD at checkout. Robbie, let's talk about Ohio State this year. And looking at their last year's numbers, 13-1, 9-1 in conference, 7-7 against the number, also 7-7 over-under number here. Looking at their schedule here, starting off with FAU at home, Cincinnati at home, and then they're going to start their Big Ten conference at Indiana, in-game conference schedule there, Miami of Ohio to follow, and then started off with at Nebraska. But your overall thoughts, what Ryan Day taking over the helm here for Ohio State? How are you looking to bet the Buckeyes this year?
Well, they're going to be, there's no value betting Ohio State, let's put it that way, because they are priced in the stratosphere, rightfully so, because they've become one of those elite programs across the country. I guess you could put them on one hand right now if you say Oklahoma, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson, probably the 5 that just reload every single year. And then there's a lot of 1As underneath them. But Ohio State shows you that, looking at returning starters, it makes no difference on how Ohio State's going to perform in any given year. I mean, I think they only had 3 returning starters either last year or the year before, and yet here they are, either in the college football Final Four or right on the doorstep of the college football Final Four 2 years in a row. So Ohio State's very, very talented. Ryan Day's going to take over as head coach here. Urban Meyer out. Ryan Day in. Offense will stay the same because Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson, who ran the offense, Kevin Wilson just takes over as the coordinator. The change here for OSU is going to be on the defensive side of the football, where they've hired Greg Madison, longtime defensive coordinator, and they've hired Jeff Hafley to be the co-coordinator here. Not a lot of change to the system, Drew, but one thing mandated from the head coach was that Ohio State play out of a 4-man defensive front, which, as I said earlier, if you're Ohio State, if you're Clemson, if you're Bama, if you're Georgia, you can get these defensive linemen 6'5", 280, 6'6", 280, and you can get enough to have a 7, 8, 9-man rotation. So it's to your benefit to play that way. That's where they're going to go with their system this year. Their defense was a wreck last year. I think that in their 9 conference games last year, in 7 of those, it might have been 8, I think it was 7, they allowed over 400 total yards. And they were giving up over 400 total yards to teams that weren't really prolific offenses, such as Northwestern. So the defense has to be cured here for Ohio State. Dwayne Haskins and company were so good on offense that they were able to outscore a lot of opponents. We'll see. Justin Fields comes over here to quarterback this team this year from Georgia, transferred out. It looks like Justin Fields will be the starter for this team. Didn't get his shot behind Jake Fromm at Georgia. He'll get his shot here. It could be a Kyler Murray type situation where when Baker Mayfield left, I think the early thought was, well, there's no way Kyler Murray can match Baker Mayfield's numbers. He did, and then some. And I think the prevailing thought here early on might be, hey, there's no way Fields can come close to Dwayne Haskins' numbers, 50 TDs, 6 interceptions, but maybe he can. We'll have to wait and see. This offense is so good and so gifted, rich in talent that, as long as the quarterback doesn't turn the ball over, you can put up big numbers. The schedule, right off the bat, Florida Atlantic, Lane Kiffin going to come to Ohio State. Should be able to get through that rather easily. Then Luke Fickell with an upcoming and probably an upper echelon AAC team this year comes in from Cincinnati. Of course, it'll be big for him because he used to coach at Ohio State, so maybe Ohio State a little bit overpriced there as we look ahead to what we might want to bet. Maybe Cincy plus points worth it there. The division we've talked about over and over again. Your big games are Michigan, Penn State, and Michigan State. In the case of Ohio State, they get 2 out of 3 at home. Michigan State's a home game. Penn State's a home game. They'll close the season on the road at Michigan. Michigan will play that one with big revenge motive. In between, the cross-division games are Northwestern, Wisconsin. Again, both pretty difficult. And then the third one is Nebraska. All 3, in my estimation, fairly difficult. So I don't know that the season's any cakewalk from a point spread perspective. Drew, last year, this team against the spread was only 6-8. 13-1 team that goes 6-8 against the numbers shows you just how overvalued they can be. And I would expect those numbers to be inflated once again, and maybe a pick and choose situations to bet against Ohio State. Take undervalued dogs, and total wise, it's kind of difficult because the odds makers have caught up to Ohio State. They can score at will, and it's likely to be the same this year. I just don't know that they'll give up points the way that they gave up points last year. Last year was really a strange year for Ohio State on the defensive side. In fact, the last 2 years have been kind of strange defensive years for Ohio State in the fact that they haven't defended well at all. We'll see if Madison can correct this. I believe that he can, and maybe overs or totals will be priced a little bit too high toward the over in Ohio State games.
Robbie, good breakdown so far. We got a couple teams left here in the Big Ten East Division. We'll be breaking down the Big Ten West Division next week with Robbie Veno on the podcast. But moving down the line here, we got Penn State, the Nittany Lions, finishing 9-4 last year, 6-3 in the Big Ten, 7-6 ATS, and 8-5 their over/under. So trended towards the over was Penn State. Their schedule sets up Idaho Vandals off the start, Buffalo Bulls second, and then the Pitt Panthers before a bye week and heading into Big Ten Conference play on a Friday night at Maryland. That will be a fun one to watch. But, Robbie, what are you thinking here for the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, this is interesting, Drew, because I don't know where to go with them based on the quarterback position. Trace McSorley meant so much to this team the last couple of years. Now, obviously, James Franklin has this offense humming in Penn State right now. So, maybe it's a plug-and-play system at this point in time, but there are such things as intangibles, individual player intangibles that McSorley brought to the table that we don't know every quarterback has. I'd be interested to see them right out of the chute against Idaho and Buffalo, just to see if they can, rack up in that 60-point range, which they would have done against this type of opponent last year and the year before. From a coaching perspective, this is as stable as it gets inside this division, where we've just talked about changes for every team, at least in one coordinator position or head coach position. This one's stable. Everybody's here. The systems are well-known personnel-wise, coaching staff-wise. So Penn State, to me, should be every bit as good on both sides of the football again. Last year, remember James Franklin had that quote, which really, living where I do now, Drew, outside of Philadelphia, I know a lot of Penn State fanatics. And they were very, very displeased with that outburst that James Franklin had about mid-season last year. I forget when he said, "We're great, we're not elite." A lot of the, Penn State supporters took offense at the fact that he said his program wasn't elite. But I think it shows that James Franklin is so driven to be Ohio State, to be Michigan. Right now, as good as they've been the last 2 years, they're really not considered at that level on a national, from a national standpoint. So I think that his work ethic is tremendous. It was at Vandy. It has been here. I feel like he will have it. This team was 9-4 last year. I can see improvement there by this team this season, even though the schedule is going to be somewhat difficult because just based on the division that they're in. If we go outside division, it's Purdue, but they get them at home. It's Minnesota on the road, and we know that, PJ Fleck and Row the Boat is coming. They're getting better and better. And then their third game is at Iowa, which is never easy. So the schedule's not an easy one by any means once they get inside that 9-game conference schedule. But I feel like he can make improvements to this team. My biggest question with them is at QB. If the quarterback situation turns out to be fine and runs the way it ran with McSorley, then they're probably going to be more like a 10-3 team, if I count their bowl game in there, than they were a 9-4 team. Point spread wise, they're not priced at the level of Ohio State, so you can find some edges with Penn State. James Franklin hasn't been one, Drew. We look for these coaches all the time who have teams that are, quite often favorites in the 20-point range. And you look for these coaches that don't let off the gas pedal in the fourth quarter. Franklin's a guy who doesn't let off the gas pedal in the fourth quarter. So you can cover big numbers with him. And with something to prove this year, I feel like these undermanned teams, especially right out of the chute, Idaho and Buffalo, could be real good plays for Penn State, as long as they're not, ridiculously priced. I could lay 24 points against Buffalo without Tyree Jackson at quarterback now, and you could probably lay in the 30s against Idaho and safely cover. So it'll be interesting to see, but I'm most interested in the quarterback play for Penn State this year.
Yeah, and Robbie, you bring up James Franklin not letting up the gas pedal. What was it last year against Georgia State? They were up by like 50 points or something, and he was still throwing the ball late in the fourth quarter, pouring it on. I think he kicked a field goal with like 3 seconds left, something like that. Do you remember that game?
Yeah, it was Kent State.
Oh, it's Kent State.
Kent
Okay.
State, 63-10. Yeah. I mean, and he's known for that. So like I say, you make notes of these coaches. We all do it. All of us who bet the games and handicap the games, we all want to know who these coaches are who don't, unlike Nick Saban, who lets off the gas pedal the entire second half, and underdogs use the back door rather easily to cover. This is not one of those head coaches. And I know, like I say, that he's got a point to prove here this year. So it'll be interesting to see how Penn State goes.
All right, Robbie. And we got one team left here, guys. And remember the coupon code CFBPOD. That's CFBPOD at checkout for $300 off any full season college football NFL package for Robbie Veno or myself, Drew Martin. Robbie, let's break it down here. We got the Rutgers Scarlet Knights finishing us off here. 1-11 last year, 0-9 in conference, 7-5 ATS. So they actually won money at a 1-11 record. A lot of times, Robbie, I'll throw it to you to break down Rutgers, but a lot of times with teams that finish winning money for their backers, but well below 50% record overall, I think that that's a positive on betting them the next year. That means that the team wasn't giving up. They weren't quitting. They were still playing and staying within numbers late in the game, kind of contrasting to what we were just talking about with Penn State. But over-under 4-8, so a big trender towards the under here was Rutgers. Hey, they're going to be up against it, Robbie, in the East Division. They got all the big boys in their division. It's tough to find wins, but a team that didn't quit on the season, finished over 50% ATS last year. It's not a full fade for me, Robbie. How are you viewing Rutgers this year?
Yeah, let's use this too, Drew. We always talk about, and it's something that obviously is applicable to handicapping, but coaches and teams that make minor bowl games and get the extra 15 practices and use that as a springboard into the following season, a positive note. The extra practices, we made a bowl, hooray for us, and they come out really charged up for the next season. Rutgers didn't make a bowl game last year, so I can't use a bowl game and extra practices in that springboard theory. But what I can use is the fact that they covered their last 5 games of the year. How about they covered against Northwestern? They covered against Wisconsin. They covered against Michigan. They covered against Penn State. And they covered to end the season against Michigan State. Almost won that game outright. losing 14-10. You go through those games, they lost to Northwestern by 3. They lost to Wisconsin by 14. Michigan, they happened to be getting enough points to get the cover because they got beat by 5 touchdowns. But Penn State, they lost by 13, and Michigan State, as I said, by 4. That's a pretty good sign that Chris Ash, who's earned a 4th season here, generally speaking, you don't earn a 4th season when you have the 3-year straight-up mark that Chris Ash has. But you can see the progress right there in those 5 games to end the year. That's their springboard into 2019. They were super excited last year to have freshman quarterback Artur Sikowski, who is a Jersey-grown kid and just made a lot of mistakes last year, freshman mistakes. Obviously, if you're on the team that's overwhelmed by the opponent's talent, then you're going to be forced into mistakes. But it's his sophomore year now. This kid, if you took him and put him on any upper echelon team in a Power 5 conference, you'd hear a lot more about him. He's got that type of ability. I think he develops even more this year. For Chris Ash, who's a defensive coach by nature, he wants to improve the defense even a little bit more. Got rid of his defensive coordinator, Jay Newman, and brought in Andy Boo. Now, Andy Boo's been around a while as a defensive coordinator, was with Maryland the last 3 years, so he knows the Eastern Division of the Big Ten. He was in it with Maryland last year. He knows the Western Division as well, so he knows the personnel inside the conference. That's a good sign. He's going to take over the play calling role here. These two guys, the reason for the hire is that they've worked together quite a bit. I think what I was reading, they met like in the late 1990s as assistant coaches, and philosophically they both are on the same wavelength. So that's a real good fit here for Chris Ash. He doesn't have to hover over the defense as much as he had to last year. He can give the reins up to Boo. He knows that what he believes in, this guy will get across to the players. And as good a defense as they were for a 1-11 team last year, probably be even better this year. I think they're on the rise. He's getting more talent in New Jersey to stay home. And just by the looks of that 5-0 cover streak down the stretch last year, I think you can safely say that Rutgers is a team that inside the conference you can look to as a dog. Who wants to bet Rutgers, right, Drew? How many people do you talk to during the week? Or let's say public bettors, how many want to bet Rutgers, a 1-11 team? Nobody. So the numbers, you can get good numbers with this side. They're going to open against UMass, which that game is at home, and Rutgers is a better team than UMass, so that should be a win. But then right away they're going to go to Iowa. I think we'll see at that point in time, while Rutgers is, unless they suffer massive injury against Massachusetts in week 1, which I doubt, they're going to be as healthy as they are all season long. They're going to go on the road and play a big-time Big Ten team. And we'll see what they can do against Iowa on the road. They come back, they have a bye week. They'll play non-conference BC and then get into the conference season for the most part. Their other non-conference game is against Liberty, who I believe lost their quarterback and may be down a little bit throwing the football this year. But point here being, they covered numbers against the best that there is to offer in the Big Ten down the stretch last year, 5-0. To me, you got to put an asterisk next to Rutgers. They're only going to get better offensively. Right now, it's the one thing where they're furthest away from the pack is on offense. There's the Big Ten East and the Big Ten West, and then there's Rutgers where offense is concerned. But defensively, Ash has them going, and if the quarterback play, which I believe is going to be real good this year, improves a little bit and the turnovers get cut down, make money on Rutgers. You did it last year. I certainly believe you can do it this year.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of betting mythology here, betting Rutgers this year. I mean, I think that it projects well for them. And like you said, down the stretch, what they were able to do was very impressive. I mean, this year against UMass to start it off, and then at Iowa before the bye week, and then also they get Boston College out of conference. It's almost like, Robbie, you'd like to see this team just kind of get like 3 patsies, and then head into the Big Ten Conference, give themselves a shot at a bowl game, not really play, too good of out-of-conference teams. But it is what it is for the Rutgers football program. So might be a bet on, even though they were likely the worst team in the Big Ten. But Robbie, thanks for the time. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Remember the coupon code CFBPOD at checkout for $300 off any full season football package at sportsmemo.com for Rob Veno or myself, Drew Martin. We appreciate you tuning in. Robbie, anything else you want to throw in before we shut this down?
Yeah, just, we love reaction from the audience. So as you always say, Drew, get us on Twitter either way. Hopefully you like the information we're giving you. We're trying to get everybody caught up on. Maybe you can't read up as much as we're able to and know the exact situations of these teams. So we feel like we're being helpful. Let us know if we are, or if there's something else we can do to better the podcast.
Absolutely, Robbie. And that's at Rob Veno Sports or at Drew Martin Bets on Twitter. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Happy Friday to you. Have a fun, safe weekend. Best of luck with your bets, and we'll talk on Monday.